A reckless act shattered an entire career. The moment she hurled the crucifix to the ground, it wasn't just the clang of metal striking stone, it was like a blade tearing through the hearts of millions of believers. A woman once hailed as the rising star of European literature lost everything in just a matter of days: her fame, her awards, and the trust of the public. This story is real, and it sparked an earthquake of controversy around the world. Backhand index pointing right, was it an act of fearless rebellion or a tragedy of self-destruction? The beginning of a dream, every dream begins with a pure light, like a fragile seed planted deep in the human heart. Yet within that very beginning lies the shadow of trial, when ambition no longer shines beneath the lamp of faith. At dawn in the hills of Tuscany, a veil of mist draped the golden fields of sunflowers, each bloom turning like 1,000 watchful eyes toward the rising sun. Birds sang across the weathered red rooftops, their voices mingling with the earthy scent of soil still damp from the night. In this quiet radiance, a young woman walked slowly along a cobblestone path, clutching to her chest a worn notebook, its frayed edges carrying scraps of tender, half-formed dreams. Her eyes sparkled, reflecting the entire sky at daybreak, as though the words inside her were straining to break free into reality. Ahead of her appeared the figure of a renowned old writer, thin frame, hair silvered with time, steps heavy yet eyes still glowing with creative fire. She quickened her pace, trembling yet resolute, and at last her voice broke the silence. Backhand index pointing right, write me a story. If one day I become famous, I will love you. In that instant, the world seemed to pause. The wind ceased its stirring, and the sunflowers bowed their heads as though listening. Behind those words lay a childlike faith, an innocent longing, yet also the first flicker of change. For a dream, if it grows outside the light of God, can turn a golden field into a darkness that devours the soul. From afar, the church bells tolled, their echo like a solemn warning. And so the story began, poised to cross into a journey where light and shadow would forever wrestle for dominion. The Milan Literary Award's the glare of fame can blind the human heart, and in a single arrogant moment, the very faith that once upheld a person may be cast aside without mercy. At such times, the line between glory and downfall grows thinner than ever. The Milan Hall glittered on the night of the Literary Awards. Golden ceilings shimmered and chandeliers poured down cascades of crystal light, as if the stars themselves had descended. Every seat was filled, applause roared like ocean waves, and the relentless clicking of cameras turned the stage into a storm of flashing light. Onto the podium stepped a young woman, her eyes gleaming with pride. Draped in a gown that embraced her slender frame, she drew the breathless gaze of the entire room. A journalist rose, his voice ringing out clearly across the hall. Was it God who guided you to this success? The audience fell silent, hanging on her reply. But instead of a grateful smile, she let out a quiet laugh, then declared boldly, "Backhand index pointing right, God was too far away when I was struggling. Now that I've succeeded, I don't need him by my side." Her words dropped like a blade of ice, and the atmosphere grew heavy. Then suddenly, she pulled from the book in her hand a small crucifix, the very symbol of her own faith, and hurled it to the floor. The clang of metal striking marble thundered through the hall like a bolt of lightning tearing the night apart. The audience reeled. Some gasped, others clutched their chests and crossed themselves in shock. A storm of whispers erupted. Was this reckless defiance a declaration of freedom or the beginning of betrayal? The lights still blazed, the cameras still flashed, yet the young woman's face no longer carried the innocence of her first steps. Instead, it bore the look of defiance, like someone setting fire to the last bridge that once connected her to the sacred. Fall from the spotlight message. The dazzling lights of the world always conceal a lurking shadow. The splendor of luxury often shines so brightly at blinds, and behind the curtain of applause and painted smiles lies the abyss of downfall. When the heart silences the whisper of conscience, the purest dream is slowly veiled by the shadows of temptation. On that Milan literary evening, the banquet unfolded in a grand hall. Velvet curtains cascaded to the floor, chandeliers showered the room with brilliance, and the light glinted off glasses of red wine like streaks of shimmering blood. Cigarette smoke drifted lazily through the air, blending with the lilting music, weaving an atmosphere both alluring and perilous. The young woman, now accustomed to being the center of attention, laughed radiantly amid a chorus of congratulations, raised glasses, and gazes filled with admiration and desire. Fame had swept in like a sudden gust of wind, carrying away the innocence she once bore. Caught in its whirl, she surrendered herself to a fleeting affair with a wealthy publisher, a powerful man in a polished suit, drenched in heavy cologne, his words flowing as smoothly as fine wine. On a white-draped table, a letter lay untouched in the corner, a letter from the old writer, filled with counsel about morality, faith, and the true worth of literature. Yet amidst the noisy laughter and the swirl of crimson wine, she never reached for it. The spotlight and the gaze of that powerful man had eclipsed the fragile glow of guidance. In that forgotten letter lay a painful symbol. The world's blinding brilliance always hides a silent shadow, waiting to consume those who chase too recklessly after glory. Betrayal: when one turns away from true love to chase the glitter of false light, the heart not only loses its anchor, but also surrenders itself into the arms of deceit. Every choice carries a price, and sometimes that price is a lifetime of regret. That night, rain poured over the old cobblestone street, the very path where once the old writer and the young woman had walked side by side, sharing simple dreams of literature. He stood there, frail frame beneath a thin umbrella, his eyes quietly following her. His heart, though never voiced, had always carried a silent devotion, gentle and constant, like the rain itself. But before him now stood a different woman. She stepped into the sleek car of the publishing director, the powerful man who had offered her both fame and splendor. Without a glance back, she closed the door, leaving the old writer alone in the cold rain. That night, she surrendered herself into the arms of that man, trading innocence for a shortcut to renown. Outside the window, the patter of rain mingled with the laughter of clinking glasses, composing a bitter symphony etched deep into the soul of the old man she abandoned. Amid the downpour, the old writer let go of his umbrella. The fragile fabric spun in the wind, drifting past the solemn statue of Christ in the square. In that moment, he understood he was too old to shield the wings of a youth eager to soar, and the love he had guarded so tenderly had dissolved into an endless solitude. The tragedy of a book launch fame can lift a person to dazzling heights, but it can just as swiftly hurl them into the abyss. When truth is laid bare, all the glittering lights become nothing more than mirrors reflecting the emptiness within. The book launch unfolded in a lavish hall, its mirrored ceiling scattering beams of brilliance, champagne glasses clinking like a triumphant anthem. The crowd, readers, journalists, critics, pressed forward, cameras flashing relentlessly. The young woman, radiant in a magnificent gown, stepped onto the stage with a proud smile, certain the spotlight tonight would seal her name in glory. But then the air shifted. A critic rose, his voice cutting sharp as steel. There was evidence her book bore the mark of plagiarism. The accusation fell like a judge's gavel, leaving the hall stunned. In an instant, the applause dissolved into murmurs of doubt, and the cameras, once aimed to celebrate, turned into merciless eyes, exposing her shame to the world. The publisher, the very man who once held her with promises of power, now stood apart, cold and calculating. With practiced detachment, he cast off responsibility, laying the blame squarely upon her and declaring the contract void. The door to triumph slammed shut, leaving her abandoned on the stage, swallowed by the glare of 1,000 lights. Her heart grew heavy. Music still played, applause still echoed, the lights still blazed, yet it all only deepened the hollow void within her. The spotlight she once chased had become a set of chains, tightening around her, choking every illusion she had ever held. The obsession with fame. When fame becomes an obsession, a person will grasp at any means to cling to the fading glow. Yet the harder they struggle, the deeper the false shadow drags them into the abyss. After the shock of her book launch scandal, the young woman refused to accept defeat. She plunged into a frenzy of publicity campaigns, hiring PR teams to inflate her image, paying for flattering articles, weaving a glittering facade to hide the truth. Across billboards in the lawn, her face shone, lips painted crimson, eyes burning with pride, an image meant to convince the world she was still triumphant. But behind that veneer, deception piled upon deception. She invented stories to stir attention, bribed influencers to praise her, and choreographed every step, every word, as though life itself had become a performance. Yet falsehoods cannot endure forever. A grave mistake surfaced, a media scandal broke wide open, and evidence of her deceit was laid bare before the public. This time, no one came to her defense. Public opinion turned hostile, the press attacked without mercy, and the very newspapers that once sang her praises now tore her reputation to shreds. The fame she had stitched together with money and manipulation collapsed in an instant, faster than it had ever been built. In a darkened room, she sat alone, the glow of a screen reflecting article after article tearing her apart. The pale blue light carved shadows into her hollow face, while outside, rain drummed against the window, amplifying her solitude. In that moment, she finally understood. Whoever builds their life upon sand will see it swept away when the storm arrives. Falling to the bottom when the spotlight fades, people often drown themselves in drink, trying to fill the hollow in their hearts with alcohol and illusions. Yet it is in those moments that the pit of ruin yawns widest, ready to swallow everything whole. After scandal upon scandal, the young woman's career lay in ruins. Those who once called her friend, who once toasted her beneath the flashing lights, now quietly turned their backs. The stage was gone, the applause silenced, only whispers of contempt and eyes filled with scorn remained. In desperation, she chose escape. Lavish parties stretched until dawn, neon lights flickering, music tearing through the night, mixed with coarse laughter and the sharp clink of glass on glass. She spiraled into a whirlpool of alcohol and gambling, surrounded by strangers drawn only to indulgence and gain. Then, one night, tragedy struck. A hostess at the party collapsed from an overdose, screams echoing through the smoke and haze. In an instant, the dazzling lights turned into the flashing blue and red of police cars. The pounding music gave way to the shrill wail of sirens. The media stormed in, cameras sweeping across the chaos, capturing a stain that could never be erased. The consequences came swiftly: lawsuits, relentless exposure by the press, and at last, a courtroom trial. The prison sentence fell upon her like a cold blade, severing the last of her illusions. In that moment, she understood, arrogance may lift us to the heights, but downfall hurls us into the abyss. A prayer in suffering in the darkest of days, when every light of ordinary life has gone out, one flame still flickers, a mother's prayer. That love, though silent, is the thread that binds a soul to hope and forgiveness. Inside the cold prison, gray walls loomed as if intent on choking the spirit. The young woman curled up on the iron bed frame. Outside, rain tapped steadily, each drop slipping through the bars like the ticking of a clock counting down her life. No more music, no more glory, only the weary sighs of fellow inmates, a grim chorus echoing through the cell. Amid these shadows, she unexpectedly received a bundle of old letters. They were from the elder writer who had once guided her, words about integrity, about what truly matters, words she had long ignored. Yet what broke her into tears was not the ink on the page, but the whispered prayers of an aging mother who, day and night, still knelt to beg God's mercy for her lost daughter. In that darkness, she suddenly understood prayers are never wasted. They are like small candles burning patiently, waiting for the moment a heart chooses to open. For the first time in years, she buried her face in trembling hands and whispered through tears, "Lord, forgive me." At that moment, a breeze slipped through the iron bars, carrying with it an unfamiliar warmth. In the heart of the prison, she seemed to hear a gentle voice, and her withered heart began to beat again with hope. For a mother's prayer is always waiting at heaven's gate. The return of an old companion when the whole world turns its back, a true love waits, patient, wordless, never accusing, only opening its arms. In that instant, a heart once hardened to stone realizes that real love never left. On visitation day, amid the crowded line of faces, a familiar figure stepped forward, stopping her breath. It was the old writer, thinner than before, his hair now silver, his eyes etched with the deep lines of time, yet still glowing with a gentle fire. He sat down across the cold glass divider, his trembling hands resting lightly on the steel table. His voice, hoarse and slow, came as though each word had been drawn straight from the heart. Backhand index pointing right, I never stopped praying for you, with the very cross you once cast aside. Out there are too many traps. The failure is mine for not shielding you enough. Those words shattered her defenses. Tears spilled, tracing down her cheeks, dripping onto the calloused hands he pressed against the glass. For the first time in years, she felt with certainty that real love still existed, untouched by time, unbroken by fame or failure. A love steady, silent, and asking nothing in return. In that moment, the contrast was piercing. Outside lay the glittering illusions that had once swept her away, but here, in silence and simplicity, true love had been waiting all along. And she finally understood. She had never been completely alone. The tragedy within some tragedies do not arrive as punishments from the outside, but as the bitter harvest of one's own choices. Looking back, the deepest pain is not abandonment, but the realization of having extinguished one's own light. The prison night was heavy, thick as velvet draped across the world, pierced only by a weak yellow bulb spilling onto the damp concrete floor. She sat alone, knees drawn to her chest, eyes vacant as they traced the cracks of the ceiling. And in that silence, a cry broke loose, raw and desperate. "Why did you let me fall this far, Lord?" Memories crashed back like a storm. The grand hall of Milan, where she had once tossed aside the crucifix in pride. The glittering parties, the liquor, the smoke, the false embraces of power. Every mocking smile, every denial of God, all rose up like blades cutting into her soul. And now, each fragment of memory stood as witness, proving one thing: she had been the one to drive herself into the abyss. Tears streamed down her hollow face, yet they could no longer cleanse. She understood then, this sorrow was not something placed in her hands by God. It was born of her own arrogance, her reckless defiance. The wound was carved by her own hand, and what remained was nothing but the hollow ache of a soul emptied of light. The seed of faith at the very edge of suffering, when every other light has gone out, there remains only one place to cling to: faith. And when trembling lips finally whisper a prayer, it is then that a new seed is sown within the heart. In the narrow prison cell, beams of light pierced through the bars like silver blades. She knelt before a small wooden cross, a gift from a fellow inmate. Her face was gaunt, hair tangled, hands trembling as they clutched the cold crucifix. Her voice broke in fragments, then as sobs. "If you still remember me, please grant me a chance to begin again." The words rose from the deepest pit of her soul, stripped of pride, stripped of complaint, leaving only the longing to be made new. That night, she drifted into a strange dream. A quiet reading room, sunlight spilling softly through a window, the fragrance of fresh pages in her hands, children's voices rippling around her as they sounded out words. No false spotlight, no way to fame, only a stillness flowing through her spirit like a gentle stream. When she awoke, her eyes brimmed with tears, but despair had loosened its grip. Deep inside, a faint light flickered to life. It was not the glare of the stage, but the radiance of faith, the fertile soil where a seed had just been planted. Redemption through love, true love carries the power to heal, to turn wounds into memories, mistakes into beginnings. Only when a heart learns to love and to be loved does redemption truly take root. The day her name was cleared, newspapers ran headlines, public voices softened, but inside, she no longer craved the glare of hollow fame. The one who had stood for her, shielding her from the tide of accusation, was none other than the old writer of years past, the man who had prayed, watched, and loved her without condition. The world had turned its back, he alone remained. And it was his hands that finally pulled her out of the shadows. She returned to her writing, but no longer as a ladder to glory. Now, each word poured forth like a fresh stream from a quiet heart free of calculation, untouched by rivalry. Between her lines, readers found repentance, gratitude, and hope, truths watered by suffering and forgiveness. Not long after, they were married in a simple ceremony. No blinding cameras, only the gentle toll of church bells, incense curling upward, and two hands clasped tightly together. She stepped away from the glitter of the literary stage, choosing instead the stillness of life beside him, walking to church each morning, writing side by side, building a new chapter together. And on a face once marked by sorrow, only a peaceful smile remained. An open ending every story, no matter how soaked in tears and shattered dreams, can become a lantern for those who walk the road after us. Only when we dare to face our own shadows can we pass on a light that is real. In a university lecture hall in Milan, she stood at the podium, not as a literary star, but as someone who had stumbled. Before hundreds of young faces hungry for recognition, she unfolded her journey, from a girl with simple literary dreams, to the glittering nights that led her astray, to the prison walls that broke her pride, and at last, to the grace of forgiveness. Her voice trembled, but each word pierced like an arrow through the arrogance of those listening. Fame is like strong liquor. The more you drink, the thirstier you become, until it burns your very soul, she said. The room fell silent, bathed only in the gentle glow from stained glass windows. What lingered in the air was not a lecture, but a testimony written in blood and tears. And from the very place that once chained her, now rose a message of hope, of light, forgiveness, and beginnings reborn. Beyond those walls, her life had taken a quieter turn. Beside the aging writer who had redeemed her, she found joy in the ordinary, children's laughter echoing through their small home, the warmth of shared meals, the rhythm of walking to church together at dawn. One evening, as the golden sunset streamed through the window, their firstborn reached for the old wooden cross, the same one she had once cast aside, and gently tucked it between the pages of an open book. In that moment, the story did not close with a period, but with a promise of continuation.